Old Thomas Tom Miller, at 76, moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who had spent a lifetime observing the forest, not rushing through it. His hands, gnarled and strong, their lines etched deep by decades of sun and wind, told silent tales of countless miles hiked, of towering trees identified by bark and leaf and shadow, of the patient, relentless vigilance that came from 40 years as a park ranger in the vast, untamed expanse of Glacier National Park. His skin, leathery and creased by the elements, was a living map of seasons endured, of dawn patrols through misty valleys and solitary nights beneath a canopy of indifferent stars. Every ache in his joints, every scar on his knuckles, was a quiet testament to a life lived in raw communion with the wild. Now retired, for the last 7 years, he lived in a modest, 2-room cabin on the ragged edge of the Kootenay National Forest in western Montana, miles from the bustling tourist trails and the bureaucratic demands of official duties. He preferred the deeper, profound quiet of the lesser-known wilderness, where the only demands were those of nature itself. The cabin, a sturdy fortress built by his own hands 5 decades ago, with timber he'd felled and milled himself, smelled perpetually of pine resin and wood smoke, a comforting, elemental scent that was as much a part of him as the silver in his beard and the deep-set lines around his observant eyes. He often thought of it as an extension of his own being, a wooden shell for his quiet, forest-bound soul. His days were a tapestry of simple, yet profound routines, each thread woven with deliberate intention, mending old fishing nets, their intricate knots familiar under his calloused fingers, anticipating the spring thaw, carving small, intricate wooden birds from fallen branches, their polished surfaces reflecting the firelight, reading worn natural history books by the comforting warmth of his wood stove, the steady crackle of burning pine a percussive counterpoint to the rustle of turning pages. And, most importantly, walking the familiar paths of the forest that spiraled out from his cabin door like veins from a heart. His eyes, though aged, retained a piercing sharpness, perpetually scanning the undergrowth, the tree line, the distant peaks. Missing nothing, his ears were finely attuned to the subtle symphony of the wild, the distant shriek of a hawk circling high above, the delicate rustle of a mouse in dry leaves under a moonless sky, the almost imperceptible shift in the wind's song as it carried new scents from distant valleys. He often reflected on his transition from active ranger to solitary elder. There was a freedom now, a deeper, unburdened immersion in the cycles of the natural world. No paperwork, no regulations, no curious tourists to guide, no permits to check. Just the raw, unvarnished truth of the forest, and his quiet, respectful place within it. He'd always felt more at home among the trees than among people, understanding the unspoken language of nature far better than the often confusing nuances of human interaction. In retirement, that feeling had only deepened, solidifying into a profound sense of belonging. He missed Silas, his faithful golden retriever, gone now for what felt like an eternity, his absence a hollow space in the cabin that even the crackling fire couldn't quite fill. But even that grief had settled into a quiet acceptance, another part of the natural cycle, like the falling of leaves in autumn. This particular autumn, the air held an unusual crispness, a premature bite that gnawed at his exposed skin and stole the warmth from his lungs, hinting at an early, brutal winter. The aspens, usually holding their vibrant glory until late October, had turned a fierce, almost violent gold by mid-September and were already shedding their leaves with an urgent haste, carpeting the forest floor in a fleeting, breathtaking brilliance that crunched underfoot with every step. The migrating birds seemed to hurry their journey south, their calls more urgent, a feathered exodus. Tom felt the coming cold in his bones, the old ache in his left knee, a reliable barometer of the plummeting temperatures. His focus, however, wasn't on the gathering storms or the dwindling daylight, but on a particular, majestic resident of the forest, an old grizzly bear. Tom had known this bear, or at least one remarkably like him, for decades. Ranger logs spoke of a dominant male in this territory for at least 20 years. Tom had given him a silent, respectful name, Old Scar, a pragmatic reference to a distinctive white scar above his right eye, a jagged, almost artistic line that bisected his brow, likely from a long-ago, savage skirmish with another dominant boar, or a close call with a falling tree during a violent windstorm. Old Scar was a monarch of these woods, a formidable, solitary presence, usually seen as a fleeting shadow among the distant trees, a powerful, dark shape disappearing over a ridge, a low rumble in the undergrowth that echoed through the valley, a ghost of immense, untamed power. He was the embodiment of the wild spirit of these mountains, a living legend. But lately, perhaps for the last 6 months, Tom had noticed something different, something deeply unsettling about the old king. Old Scar was struggling. He'd started seeing his massive, distinctive tracks more often near the lower, easier slopes, avoiding the steeper, more challenging climbs that grizzlies typically favored for foraging for berries and roots. His usual confident, powerful stride, capable of covering vast distances with effortless grace, seemed to have acquired a subtle limp, a slight drag in his left hind leg that left a shallower impression in the soft earth. His coat, usually thick and glossy with the richness of summer foraging, a testament to a successful hunting season and abundant food, appeared thinner, duller, his once lustrous fur now slightly matted in places, betraying a lack of vigor. His movements were visibly slower, more labored, betraying an uncharacteristic weariness that sent a pang of concern through Tom's heart. Tom suspected a lingering injury, perhaps from a late-season confrontation with a younger, more ambitious male who sought to challenge his dominance, or simply the relentless, inescapable march of time catching up to an aging king. Grizzlies, even the most dominant and cunning, eventually succumbed to the brutal rigors of the wild. To see Old Scar falter, to witness the slow erosion of his magnificent power, was like watching a natural monument begin to crumble, a profound shift in the very fabric of the wilderness he so deeply revered. Tom felt a quiet, persistent ache for the old bear, a deep, empathetic pain that resonated with his own aging body. One crisp morning in early October, the air already sharp with the promise of frost that glittered on the pine needles, Tom found a disturbing sign. A patch of half-eaten huckleberries, typically devoured with gusto by any bear, lay scattered near a rushing stream bed, partially crushed but mostly abandoned. This wasn't like Old Scar, who was known for his voracious appetite and meticulous foraging. Further along, near a favorite fishing spot of Old Scar's, a rocky outcrop where the current created a natural eddy, a perfect place for snagging salmon, he found a freshly caught salmon, its silver scales still glinting, left mostly untouched, only a few desultory bites taken from its belly. A perfectly good meal, wasted. This wasn't just unusual, it was alarming. The bear was clearly having trouble foraging efficiently, possibly due to a deep, nagging pain that made hunting too strenuous. Or perhaps his teeth were failing, worn down by years of crunching bones, or simply the pervasive fatigue of old age. Tom, with his decades of ranger experience, knew the brutal reality of such signs. A bear unable to feed sufficiently in the crucial pre-denning months of autumn faced a grim, almost certain prospect for surviving the long, lean winter ahead. He considered calling the wildlife department, but the thought filled him with a cold dread. He knew the strict protocols, the standard operating procedures. Intervention was rare, and often, for an old, injured bear, the outcome wasn't a gentle one. A tranquilizer dart, a quick assessment, and often, a tragic decision. He respected the natural order too much to wish for that. But his heart ached for the old bear, a silent, profound ache that resonated with his own aging body and the understanding that all things, even kings, must eventually face their end. He spent the next few days in quiet contemplation, his thoughts consumed by Old Scar. He sat by his window, watching the aspens lose their final leaves, a golden confetti carried on the wind, the mountains becoming starker, more severe under the encroaching winter light. He ran scenarios through his mind, weighing options, wrestling with the ethical tightrope of interfering with the wild, a cardinal sin for a ranger. Yet, the image of Old Scar's labored movements, his untouched salmon, haunted him. Finally, a decision solidified, guided not by regulations but by the deep, unspoken understanding forged over a lifetime in the wilderness. He decided on a course of action that was both risky and deeply personal, one that went against every formal rule of wildlife management he had ever learned, but resonated deeply with the unspoken ethics of a man who loved the wilderness more than life itself. He wouldn't interfere directly, no direct contact, no habituation, but he would offer a chance. A lifeline, quietly extended through the unspoken language of compassion. Tom started his mission with meticulous, almost military planning, drawing on his ranger skills of tracking and observation. He selected specific, high-calorie offerings, cured salmon left over from his own abundant summer catches, its rich oils still potent, bags of old, forgotten dry dog food, high in protein and easily digestible, left over from Silas, his beloved hunting dog, gone now for years, the bag still smelling faintly of his old friend, a bittersweet aroma. He even rendered down some saved deer fat from a successful hunting season past, mixing it with dried apples and molasses for a potent caloric boost, a sweet, energy-rich paste. He knew just where to place them, not right by Old Scar's known paths, where other, younger, more aggressive bears or even wolves might find them, but in areas that were safe for both of them. Hidden just off trails he knew the bear favored, a specific, partially submerged rock in a remote stream, at the base of a particularly gnarled pine with a distinctive lightning scar, or beneath the overhang of a fallen giant, strategically chosen spots that only a familiar eye, like Old Scar's, would recognize. He charted these locations on a mental map, a secret network of sustenance. He'd venture out at dusk, when the light was failing rapidly and the forest was settling into its nocturnal quiet, his movements as silent as falling snow, his old hunting knife at his hip for defense if needed, though he doubted he'd ever use it on a bear. He'd place the offerings, carefully wrapped in burlap to deter smaller scavengers and keep the scent concentrated for Old Scar's powerful nose. And he would return at dawn, before the first full light, to retrieve any uneaten portions, ensuring no other animals became habituated or that Old Scar relied solely on his offerings, preventing any unnatural dependency. It was a silent, almost spiritual ritual, a quiet pact between man and bear, a negotiation conducted entirely through scent and instinct, a testament to mutual respect. He never saw Old Scar take the food. Not once. But each morning, without fail, the offerings would be gone. A faint, almost imperceptible impression in the damp dirt, a subtle disturbance of the moss, a barely visible claw mark on the bark of a nearby tree, subtle, almost invisible signs that the old Grizzly had found his hidden cache. Tom felt a quiet satisfaction each time, a deep sense of purpose that hummed beneath the surface of his solitary days. He was helping, in the most respectful, non-intrusive way he knew how, simply extending a hand of compassion across the vast, ancient chasm between human and wild. It was a language spoken not in words, but in the giving and receiving of sustenance, in the silent acknowledgement of shared vulnerability. As autumn deepened into late November, the forest hushed, preparing for winter's inevitable, heavy sleep. The days grew shorter, the sun dipping below the southern horizon earlier and earlier, casting long, frigid shadows. The first hard, sustained frost coated everything in glittering crystals, crunching underfoot like broken glass. The breath of the forest seemed to hold, waiting. Tom continued his deliveries, enduring biting winds that whipped through the valleys and plummeted temperatures that turned his breath to instant fog. He saw Old Scar a few times, from a great distance, across a canyon or through a screen of bare branches, always observing, never approaching. The limp seemed less pronounced now, his massive movements a little smoother, more confident. His coat, though still a bit sparse, seemed to have gained a healthier sheen, no longer appearing dull and matted. The subtle signs were there, the old bear was recovering, slowly but surely. The offerings were helping him put on the crucial layers of fat needed to survive hibernation, to fuel the long sleep that would renew his strength and mend his old wounds. Then, in early December, the first truly heavy snow fell, a profound, silent snowfall that blanketed the forest in a thick, insulating layer, erasing all tracks, all signs of life, pulling the world into a deep, crystalline slumber. The mountains disappeared behind a shroud of swirling white. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creak of the cabin and the distant howl of the wind. Tom knew it was time. Old Scar would be denied now, deep in a cave or under a massive pile of snow and fallen logs, entering the long sleep that would see him through the brutal heart of winter. Tom made his last offering, a large portion of dried berries and jerky, placing it near a known den site high on a sheltered slope, a farewell gift, a hopeful prayer for the coming spring. He then turned back towards his cabin, the path already fading behind him, a profound sense of peace settling over him, a quiet accomplishment warming him from the inside out. He had done what he could. The rest was up to the bear and to the indomitable spirit of the wild. The winter was long and exceptionally harsh, just as Tom had predicted. Blizzards roared through the mountains, isolating his cabin for weeks at a time, turning the world into a monochromatic landscape of white and gray. The river outside his window froze solid, its roar replaced by an eerie silence. He spent his days by the steady warmth of his fire, reading, mending his gear, tying intricate fly-fishing lures, his mind often drifting to Old Scar, sending silent wishes into the swirling snow. He often looked out his window at the pristine, untouched wilderness, wondering if his quiet intervention had been enough, if the old king had truly found his way through the lean, unforgiving months. There were moments of doubt, of course, that gnawed at him in the long, dark nights. Had he done enough? Had he simply prolonged suffering? But then he'd remember the spark in Old Scar's eye, the sheer will to live, and his resolve would strengthen. Spring arrived not with a gentle thaw, but with a sudden, powerful roar of melting snow and rushing rivers that carved new channels through the landscape. The forest slowly stretched awake, vibrant with new life, the first tenacious green shoots pushing through the melting snow, the triumphant return of migratory birds filling the air with song, the sharp, clean scent of damp earth and new growth filling his lungs. Tom, eager and a little anxious to see if his old friend had made it through, began his longer walks again, traversing the high ridges and deep valleys, his eyes perpetually scanning for tracks, for signs of life. For weeks, he found no definitive sign of Old Scar. He saw other bears, younger ones, their coats sleek and glossy from hibernation, foraging for the first greens, turning over rocks for insects. But not his bear. A quiet dread began to settle in, a heavy weight in his chest that mirrored the slow, steady thud of his own aging heart. Perhaps his efforts hadn't been enough. Perhaps nature had, as it always did, simply claimed its own. He walked slower, his gaze more somber. Then, one warm afternoon in late April, the sun high in the sky, as he hiked near a remote, sun-drenched meadow known for its early berries and abundant wildflowers, he saw him. Standing by the edge of the clearing, magnificent against the backdrop of vibrant green and towering pines, was Old Scar. He was leaner than in autumn, as all bears were after winter, but his coat was thick, a rich, healthy brown, his movements fluid and powerful, the old limp completely gone. He sniffed the air, his massive head turning slowly, majestically, taking in the scents of the revitalized forest, his senses fully alert. He looked strong, resilient, a true king of the mountains, reclaimed by the wild, a testament to his sheer will to endure. Tom instinctively froze, hidden behind a cluster of dense firs, observing, his breath held. His old heart hammered against his ribs, not from exertion, but from a rush of pure, unadulterated relief and joy. Old Scar ambled into the meadow, dug at some roots with powerful swipes of his paw, then, as if sensing a presence, turned his gaze. Not towards the roots or a distant sound, but directly towards the cluster of firs where Tom was hidden. Their eyes met across the vastness of the clearing, a distance of perhaps 100 yards. It was a long, quiet moment, a communication that transcended words, a silent acknowledgement that passed between two old souls who had shared a quiet pact through the longest winter. There was no aggression in Old Scar's gaze, no fear, just a profound, ancient knowing, a deep understanding. Old Scar then did something truly remarkable, something that brought a lump to Tom's throat and tears to his eyes, tears that blurred the magnificent image of the bear before him. He lowered his massive head, not in submission, but in a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of deep, quiet understanding, a profound salute. Then, he turned and ambled towards a small, rocky outcropping at the far side of the meadow, a spot Tom knew well as a former resting place for the bear. He sniffed around, nudged at something with his paw, then turned his head back towards Tom, almost as if inviting him, or drawing his attention to a specific spot. Tom, curious and deeply moved, waited until the bear moved away, disappearing into the shadows of the ancient trees, before making his way slowly to the spot. There, nestled neatly on a flat, sun-warmed rock, was a perfectly preserved, large hawk's feather, its intricate brown and white patterns catching the sunlight, a pristine gift from the sky. And beside it, a small pile of perfectly ripe, early-season huckleberries, carefully placed, untouched by any bite mark. It was a gift. A reciprocal gesture. A tangible thank you from the wild, an offering returned for an offering given, a visible sign of an unseen exchange. Tom picked up the feather, its softness a stark contrast to the rugged landscape, and sampled a huckleberry, its sweet burst of flavor a joyful confirmation of the bear's unspoken message. He carefully tucked the feather into his worn leather pouch, a treasure beyond measure. He made his way back to his cabin, the hawk's feather tucked safely in his pocket, its presence a constant, comforting weight. The hike felt lighter than usual, despite his aging knees, the mountain air invigorating, filled with the boundless promise of summer. His long life, spent in the solitude of these woods, had always felt complete, rich with purpose and connection to nature. But now, it felt even richer, deeper, woven into a silent, profound understanding with the wild heart of the forest. The pact forged in the depths of winter had blossomed into a lasting connection, a beautiful, undeniable testament to the unseen exchanges that occur when humans approach nature with respect, empathy, and quiet kindness. And in the quiet solitude of his cabin, the hawk feather lying on his mantelpiece, a symbol of his profound connection, Tom knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was more than just a man living in the wilderness. He was a friend to the ancient trees, the rushing rivers, and the wise old bear who still roamed his beloved mountains, a guardian of the silent, enduring spirit of the wild. He knew he would never truly be alone. Throughout the long, warm summer that followed, Tom continued his walks, though his purpose shifted from anxious surveillance to joyful observation. He caught glimpses of Old Scar now and then, sometimes a dark shape fishing in a distant stream, other times a broad back disappearing into a berry patch. The bear was clearly thriving, his movements strong and fluid, a testament to the life force that pulsed through the forest. Tom felt a deep satisfaction, a quiet pride in the almost imperceptible role he had played. As autumn returned, painting the mountains in fiery hues, Tom often found small, unexplained gifts near his paths. A perfect, unopened pine cone on a rock by his favorite sketching spot. A smooth, river-worn stone placed neatly on a fallen log. He couldn't say for sure they were from Old Scar, but he felt it in his bones, a continuation of the unspoken dialogue. These were not direct offerings of food, but symbolic tokens, acknowledgments of a shared world. One particularly blustery October day, a fierce windstorm swept through the valley, tearing at trees and whipping up dust. Tom had to stay indoors for safety, listening to the cacophony of the tempest outside. The next morning, as he ventured out to assess the damage, he found a massive old fir tree, its trunk thicker than his cabin, had fallen directly across the narrow dirt track that led from his cabin to the main logging road, his only way out. It was too large to move by himself, and the nearest help was miles away. He spent the day trying to chop at a smaller branch, but his axe barely made a dent. He felt a familiar weariness creep into his limbs. He was old, and this obstacle was formidable. As dusk approached, a new sound echoed through the woods, a series of deep, resonant huffs, followed by a powerful, sustained pushing. Tom, curious, cautiously made his way to the fallen tree. There, on the other side of the massive trunk, was Old Scar. The bear was nudging and pushing at a large, broken limb of the fallen fir, a limb that was still attached but partially blocking the track further down. With immense, powerful shoves, he moved it, clearing a path just wide enough for Tom's old pickup truck to squeeze through. Old Scar worked with a focus that was almost human, then, as if realizing his task was complete, he paused, looked across the formidable trunk directly at Tom, gave a low huff, and melted back into the shadows of the deeper forest, disappearing as silently as he had arrived. Tom stood there, staring at the cleared path, then at the spot where the old bear had stood. It was an unmistakable act, a direct, deliberate help. He felt a lump in his throat, a profound sense of awe and gratitude. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a reciprocating act, a direct response to the compassion he had shown. The silent pact had deepened, solidified into a true, undeniable friendship, a bond of mutual respect and survival that transcended species. He lived many more years in his cabin, a true elder of the Kootenai. His presence in the forest was as natural as the trees and the streams. He continued to leave offerings when he felt the need, especially during hard winters or dry summers. And sometimes, when he walked the trails, he would find small gifts or see a distant, familiar silhouette, a noble, scarred head turning briefly in his direction. The old bear, Old Scar, continued to thrive, a living legend of the mountains. And Tom, the old ranger, became a legend himself, living out his days in a quiet harmony with the wilderness, forever bound by the unseen exchange, the silent pact, forged in the depths of a brutal winter. He was a man who truly understood what it meant to be a friend to the wild.